Hello, Douglas Scott McCarron. Been a long time since I posted on Ukraine. My apologies. While I make content, I'm not a professional contributor. I don't make my living from YouTube like so many others that are here do. I post when I have something that I have researched and thought over. Though if you would like to buy me a coffee or visit my webpage, shown below, I would appreciate it. It does take many hours to research and generate these videos. So if you like this and want to support my efforts and subscribe, I would really appreciate it. Today I want to talk about the logistics systems in Ukraine. There are many videos on logistics, on both sides trying to degrade each other in this area. Can Russia hope to compete with the combined production capabilities of the USA, the EU, the large economies of the Pacific area? I especially like Perum's posts in this area. But I want to focus on the rail and road system of Ukraine, the actual paths used. I think this is important. Last time I released a video, the Ukrainian estimate of Russian losses had just crossed 250,000. Now they are approaching 275,000. I have no idea how accurate these numbers are, though apparently the vast majority of equipment losses have visual proof of them. As for human losses, I don't know how you can tell which body part belongs to another, so you can count the dead. But if this is accurate, it seems like a tremendous waste of future potential. Both Russia and Ukraine never really recovered from World War II, and now this could set them back even more. I also recently looked at a Forbes report that said that the Russians paid compensation to the families of the fallen, around 21 billion US dollars. Reports stated the average payout was $65,000. When you divide 65,000 into 21 billion, the result is 313,432. That's a lot more dead than the 275 the Ukrainians say. And I was also watching a video of a group of armed people seizing an oil facility in Irkutsk. Don't know why. I don't know if anyone knows why. But things might get really strange in the future. The contributor Konstantin of Inside Russia has a couple good posts on this situation. I just don't think this is going according to the plan Putin says is working. Okay, this is a map of the major rail and roads of Ukraine using the French language. I don't remember where I got it, but I'm using it because it is visually the cleanest to look at that I could find. Spellings of towns will be different, but names being correct don't really matter. It is the situation that does. This map is by no means complete. You can go on Google Maps or something similar, then zoom in and see many more roads, though not that many more rail lines, at least as I looked around. So, once you have piles of equipment and supplies generated by your economic sources, you need to deliver these to the military units. Every soldier will tell you they don't have enough of everything and they need more. Yet billions of various currencies of these are being produced. Some of it is lost to draft. Some is stuck forgotten at railway stations. However, size matters. Ukraine is massive. Not as big as Russia, but it is a large country. And its supplies are being shipped from long distances away and then brought to the border where the Ukrainians pick them up. Russia actually has a similar situation. They don't ship across oceans, and they are neighbors, but Russia's size is a reason for their generating and delivery problems. But once all this equipment is on the border and about to come into Ukraine, we now look at the rail and road system. This first map shows the major rail entry points into Ukraine from the west and the Balkans. The second map shows the major rail entry points the Russians have available to them. This third map shows the major Ukrainian rail paths heading east and west and also north and south. To the right is a box concentrating on the Donbass, where the war is focused now. On this map, notice that the Ukrainian rail system has many rail lines flowing east and west and north and south, which allows for multiple paths and crossing points, making it hard to close down by bombing. Unless the Russians can bomb all these cross points at the same time, continuously, the Ukrainians can find a path to get trains through. It only takes maybe a day to replace a bombed rail line, unless it was devastated, in which case it can be cleared up and running again in about a week. Some commentators question why the Russians don't bomb the rail lines. I suggest it would be a waste of time, unless it was consistent daily strikes everywhere. In World War II, the Western Allies would drop hundreds of tons of bombs on German rail yards, and with a couple of weeks, sometimes days, the Germans were running trains through them again. Now let's look at the Russian entry points. First, from Belarus. There is a lot of threat made of Belarus sending its troops and logistics, but they don't. There was an effort to use Belarus as a Russian troop and ammo base in the first months, but once the plan didn't produce a rapid victory, the Russians moved their troops out and over to the Donbass. There are many reasons, but I have a couple suggestions why this happened. One was to concentrate troops in the Donbass, but there are other reasons for this, and the lack of Belarus being involved directly is one of them. I suspect because Belarus would get its military wiped out. But here is a major thing. Along the border of Ukraine and Belarus is a large marsh called the Pripyat Marshes. So here's a map that I got from jacobshellcarbonmade.com. As you can see, the map shows an outline of the state of Massachusetts in the United States. If you know how big that state is, you can see the marsh area is about double the size north and south, and also east and west. You can see the major rivers and then some dark gray patches. Those patches are swampy woodlands. The marsh limits off-road and off-rail travel. Just to give you an idea of why it is this way, here are a couple images in the marshes. Not great cross-country truck driving territory. So coming from Belarus, you have to follow the roads and rail, making traffic easy to shell with artillery and drones. And then all four of these rail lines from Belarus run into urban areas while still in the marshes. Kovel, Sarny, Ovoroch, and Chernihiv. I hope that was pronounced right. Many of which we heard of in the opening months of the war. Some of these were occupied, but that plan depended on a quick victory by the Russians. But a quick victory didn't happen, so the Russians' offensive logistic problems would be passing over bridges in marshes, which could be blown up, stranding and possibly trapping troops between bridges, waiting to be shelled to death. So the Russians wisely got out of there and redeployed. Now that Ukraine has rebalanced its fighting ability, the same situation would happen to the Belarus military, should it choose to get involved. I've seen them pounding their chests in a kind of an adolescent macho way, which is entertaining, but it wouldn't be a wise idea to try. And such an incursion would give the Ukrainians a good reason to start shelling Belarus. Now let's look at the rail lines coming into Ukraine from Russia. Those at Bakhmach and Sumy are in rough, woody, swampy areas, and are funneled into these towns. Plus the Sumy line heads either to Bakhmach or Kharkiv. So really, it doesn't matter as much as these other two, which explains the long struggle for both of them that so far the Ukrainians have won. This area isn't impossible to get through. It is the area of one Soviet offensive after the Battle of Kursk in World War II. And there are major roads heading to them from Russia, those thick red lines. But there isn't a very dense system of rail and roads to support offensive operations from Russia. As we've all heard, Russia is very dependent on rail. However, from the Ukrainian side of these towns, you see there actually is a much more dense system of rail and roads with better cross-connecting points. So the Ukrainians have a logistical advantage here as long as their supporters send stuff to fight with. The situation is different south of Kharkiv because there are more rail lines entering from Russia, and they do cross-connect more, which is why the major fight is in this area. The weak point for the Russians is there are only two rail lines in the southern area. One crosses the Kerch Bridge, the second one comes running out of Donetsk over to Kherson. North of the Dnieper River, the Ukrainians have a good rail and road system, which may explain why the Russians eventually withdrew across the river. But the bridges across the river have been blown up, so that limits the Ukrainian ability to bring logistics across. At the start of the war, the Russians had a massive artillery superiority, and the only real way to combat this wasn't for Ukraine to attack the Russian infantry, but to attack the Russian logistics system. However, both sides had the same artillery, and were blowing each other up. but the Russians had a lot more guns. So as you look at these graphics here, these highly professional graphics, you see them blowing each other up. But then the 777s came in and started blowing up the Russians from further away. And eventually HIMARS arrived. With these, Ukrainians could attack supply dumps far out of range of the Russian artillery. Drones started dropping hand grenades on local dumps. This meant the Russians needed to move their supply dumps further away and spread them out more. And with storm shadows and other tools with greater distances, this is happening again. And this has an impact that doesn't get brought up a lot. There is a lot of discussion that because the Russians have moved their supply dumps further back, it takes longer to get supplies to the front, and also exposes supply trucks to being attacked by drones. This is accurate. But another impact that these supply trucks now consume a lot more fuel driving back and forth from the dumps, lessening the fuel available to other vehicles and lessening the number of times a truck can get back and forth in a day. When you look at the size of the area involved, this has a real impact. Recently, we have heard that the Russians are using civilian vans and cars to transport supplies. This may be because so many supply trucks have been blown up that the Russians have resorted to doing this, showing their system is near collapse. Or it may be that the Russians think the Ukrainians won't shoot at the civilian vehicles because there might be Ukrainian civilians driving them, which makes these vehicles a better choice to move supplies with. One car cannot carry as much of a truck, but 20 cars can. Plus, a drone blowing up a car isn't as effective as blowing up a truck. I know this isn't nice for the civilians, but the Russians probably don't like being in the situation either. It will also be interesting to see what happens when the Abrams show up. Abrams were designed to fight in Europe in the winter, so we shall see what impact they have once they arrive. But for now, the Ukrainian goal is breaking up the Russian logistics system. You may have heard there is a fight going on near the airport of Donetsk. On this image I captured from Google Maps, you can see the airport and Donetsk. You can see a circle showing roughly where the Ukrainian troops are. In Donetsk, there's another circle showing where the main rail system runs through the city, and there's a white line showing the distance between them, roughly 8.5 miles. Well within Ukrainian artillery fire, meaning if the Russians don't push the Ukrainians back, these rail yards will be under constant artillery fire. This is different from my discussion earlier about airplanes bombing because planes fly away after they make their strike. Artillery sits in place and sends constant shelling with no way to rebuild the rail line. And from what I can see, there are few cross points around Donetsk. Trains have to go through these rail yards. The only other rail supply line to the south is the Kerch Bridge, which is also being attacked. So the goal for both sides is clear. Either break the rail lines or keep them open. There is a highway. I've seen a couple of names for it, but I'm just going to use M14 as that shows up as much as anything else. It's this major road in the south which runs behind the Russian defensive line, which is there to protect it in the southern areas. This is why Ukraine is striving to get through the defensive line. I've heard people say the Ukrainians either need to take Tokmak, in the middle left of the map, or be able to bring the M14 highway under artillery fire to cut off the path of supplies, the red line near the coast on this map. I'm not sure this is really true. If you zoom in a bit on the M14, you will see a white line south of it. This appears to be a paved road. If you zoom in on that paved road, you will see there are more white lines, which I assume are also paved roads. When you shift to the terrain map, you can see they look paved, and that the dirt roads look very different. So what I see are possible multiple paved roads south of the M14, easily driven using stolen civilian vehicles. These run along the south, but eventually come along to a spit along the south and then turns north to meet the highway again. Depending on if that is a two-way highway or not, the Russians could drive hundreds of civilian vehicles along this road and the many smaller paved roads. Doing it this way is nowhere near as efficient as using the rails, but it is possible to do. Just saying, bringing the M14 under artillery fire may not do the trick. The logistical system for the Russians is fairly tight. In the Donbass, they have lots of possibilities. But along the south, it depends on 2 rail lines, a highway, and a few paved roads shielded by the defense line. While the Dnieper can be crossed by the Ukrainians, they don't have bridges, so they can only bring light infantry equipment. Then again, this war has pointed out that light infantry with lots of anti-tank missiles and mortars, supported by drones and HIMARS, can do a lot, but to bring a continuous stream of stuff across the river would be a challenge. All this is why the fight on the defense line is so critical. If the Russians hold the Ukrainians back from the defensive line and push them away from the Donetsk rail yards, Russia can stay in the fight. But if any of those become closed down, then the Kerch Bridge will really be on fire soon after. The Russians would need to bring supplies in by sea to Sevastopol, which is already coming under fire, or by air. And those large, expensive supply planes would be running a long gauntlet of missiles and drones. And these ships and these planes are very expensive. Yep, the Ukrainians don't have a great supply system in the south either. They have surprised everyone because after the expectation of a massive tank thrust, it seems the correct tool is light infantry hacking their way forward. But this has always been true. Many people think the Germans in World War II used their tanks to roll over the enemy and break through, but this is not true. It was the infantry that cleared the way through the enemy lines and provided a gap for the tanks to exploit. Same as it's always been. Infantry clears the way, then the tanks, chariots, whatever, exploits. Here we are again. And here we are again, stupidly killing each other for imagined countries of our minds, trying to bring our thoughts into reality, only to wreck reality.